They used to adore her, worship her, copy her every move, but now those same voices are turning, those same fans are deleting, those same platforms are backing away, and the question everyone is asking is not what happened, but how did it get this bad? Because what was once Hollywood's golden girl has become the most hated woman in the industry. And it didn't happen overnight, it happened one lie at a time, one silence at a time, one carefully constructed manipulation until the mask finally slipped, and now no amount of money, no amount of press, no amount of perfect lighting can put it back on. And if you think this is just about drama, think again. This is about everything they never wanted you to see, and I'm about to show you all of it. It started with whispers, the kind you hear backstage after the cameras stop rolling, after the makeup fades, and the smiles fall off. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public at first, but those whispers traveled fast from assistants to interns, to publicists, to stylists, and everyone was saying the same thing, that Blake Lively wasn't who the world thought she was, that behind the curated posts and staged interviews and carefully timed emotional quotes, there was something colder, something controlled, something terrifying. And it wasn't just about attitude, it was about decisions, choices that left other people broken, careers ruined, opportunities stolen. And while the public still clung to the perfect image, those on the inside knew better. They had seen the list, the private blacklist, the one her team used to make sure certain names never worked again. Influencers who criticized her found their reach throttled, fashion editors who didn't praise her looks were quietly cut from events, collaborators who asked questions were blackballed without explanation, and it was all done in silence, wrapped in grace and style and charm, until one person said enough. And when they came forward, they didn't just talk, they showed proof, screenshots, voice notes, scheduling memos that detailed how Blake controlled every element of her press image, how she manipulated narratives, how she crafted sob stories for cover. And it was that first leak that cracked the dam, and once that truth slipped through, it couldn't be stopped, and people started talking, not just fans, but colleagues, former friends, even brand reps, all with stories, all with receipts. And suddenly the whispers turned into a roar, and the woman once called America's sweetheart was now being called something else, something no one ever thought they'd say out loud, the most hated woman in Hollywood. Her downfall didn't begin with an outburst or a scandal, it began with a shift, a pause in the public's response, a hesitation from the brands, a silence from the fans that used to flood every post with praise. The carefully captioned photos stopped going viral, the interviews started being clipped, not for inspiration but for contradictions. People started to notice the patterns, the same recycled apologies, the same strategic disappearances, the same media outlets publishing her side before any facts were even known. And then came the receipts, real ones posted by a creator who had once praised her publicly, only to be blocked, shadow banned, and served to cease and desist from mentioning her name in a review. And that review wasn't hateful, it wasn't scandalous, it was honest, and the documentation showed just how fast Blake's team had moved to bury it. Within hours, messages had been sent, contracts pulled, sponsors warned, and it became clear that this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a strategy, a machine designed to protect her image at the expense of anyone who questioned it. And the public saw it all unfold, and they didn't like what they saw, because this wasn't the graceful, powerful actress they'd admired. This was someone playing a game, someone manipulating the system. And the creators who had been silenced started returning, one by one, with evidence, stories, recordings, some even showing direct links between her team and platform moderators. And suddenly people weren't just disappointed, they were furious, because they realized they had been lied to, and that everything they thought they knew was part of a performance. And the hate didn't come from nowhere, it came from betrayal. And every post, every quote, every red carpet appearance now looked different, it looked fake. And the question wasn't just how did it come to this, it was how long had she gotten away with it. The industry turned slowly, at first like a door closing in silence. One brand stepped back, then another. A studio that once called her their golden asset suddenly dropped her name from all promo and award show that always placed her front and center, left her off the invite list. And people noticed, not because she said anything, but because she didn't say a word at all. And that silence confirmed everything, because in Hollywood, silence means exposure. It means they know something's coming, and no one wants to be standing next to the fallout. And that's exactly what this was, fallout from years of manipulation, of quietly crushing people behind closed doors, of pulling strings behind the curtain. And while she smiled in photo ops and talked about grace and kindness, her private messages told a different story, messages that were now being leaked by former assistants and ghostwriters, people who once protected her because they were paid to, but now felt no obligation to stay silent. And those leaks were brutal, coordinated media attacks Exposed timestamps that match takedowns of influencer videos, internal memos with red circles around names marked as threats, and those names weren't journalists or haters, they were makeup artists, interns, personal stylist creators who spoke the truth and were punished for it. And when that truth finally reached the boardrooms, no one wanted to stand behind her anymore. Because she wasn't an icon, she was a liability, and deals fell apart faster than our team could spin excuses, and even long 10 collaborators began pulling away publicly, issuing vague statements about new creative directions which everyone knew meant one thing: we're done with her, and suddenly the most protected woman in the room had no one left to protect her. The manipulation didn't just run deep, it ran precise, calculated, flawless, and terrifying in how effective it had been for so many years. Every relationship, every deal, every photo op had been rehearsed, edited, timed, and it wasn't just for the fans, it was for control, it was for power. Her inner circle had a system, a method of constructing moments, of inserting emotions into interviews, of planting stories days before real accusations could surface to drown them, and behind all of it was a blueprint discovered in a leaked digital file, one labeled audience sentiment forecasting, and inside were charts, maps, timelines, showing how her team would respond before a scandal even started, how they could use sympathy, misdirection, trauma, even fake vulnerability to shut down truth. And it worked until it didn't, because one creator exposed that blueprint piece by piece, breaking it down, showing the lies in plain sight, highlighting how the public had been played not once, but over and over again. And as the breakdown spread across platforms, people started revisiting old clips, ones that used to make them cry now made them cringe, because they saw it, they saw the act, and once you see the act, you can't unsee it. You can't believe the tears when you know they were scripted. You can't hear the apologies when you know they were timed to kill a headline. And suddenly she wasn't hated just because of what she did, she was hated because of how long she got away with it, how much she took from people who couldn't fight back, how many voices she silenced in the name of staying adored. And now that adoration had turned to disgust, not just because she lied, but because the lie was beautiful, convincing, and used like a weapon. The real collapse began when the ones who once defended her stopped pretending and started speaking, because these weren't strangers, they were allies, influencers who had benefited from standing beside her, creators who once praised her every move, and now they were done, not quietly, not privately, but loudly. One of them released a full 20-minute video detailing how they were coached on what to say, how they were offered deals to stay silent about what they saw, and when they refused, they were ghosted, erased, blocked, and later punished by algorithms that never made sense until now, because the proof was there. Receipts, contracts, call logs, voice memos from handlers who spoke in coded language about suppressing noise and amplifying falsehoods, and the influencer community erupted not in shock but in validation, because they had felt it too, the sudden drop in views, the strange flags, the inexplicable removals, and now they had a name attached to it, a source that connected it all. And as more former supporters turned, they brought their audiences with them, and those audiences were angry not just at her but at the system that enabled it, that sold them a lie, that asked them to cry when she cried only to find out every tear was placed on cue. And suddenly she wasn't just losing followers, she was losing entire communities, entire networks that once fought to protect her, now pulling away, severing ties, not out of fear but out of principle. And her most loyal fans found themselves alone, unable to argue with timestamps and truth and screenshots and raw audio of their idol admitting to more than anyone expected. And now defending her didn't make you brave, it made you blind, and being associated with her became a risk, not a reward. The past always leaves a trail, and no matter how carefully Blake Lively tried to scrub hers, it only took one forgotten file, one old hard drive, one former employee with nothing left to lose to expose the piece that would shift everything again, because hidden deep in that archive was an early draft of a script, not for a movie, not for a show, but for an apology that was worse, because hate fades, but irrelevance is permanent in the audience she once shaped now rejected the performance completely. They knew the lines before she spoke them. They saw the pivot before it landed, and the internet, which once devoured every image, every quote, every staged vulnerability, now scrolled past her name like it never mattered, and in private she watched it all, knowing that the spotlight she once demanded had become the one thing she couldn't survive, because now it revealed too much, and the cameras that once adored her now documented silence and distance and fallout. And the final image of Blake Lively wasn't of her on a stage or a cover, it was absence, a void where a legacy was supposed to be, and no one reached to fill it, because no one wanted what was left behind. In the end, there were no headlines, No public apologies, no stage comeback. It ended not with a final scene but with absence, with the world moving forward without her image. Without her influence, without her control, and what remained was not curiosity or sympathy, but memory of manipulation, of silence, of the voices she tried to erase and the creator she tried to break, and as the platforms evolved, as the policies changed, as the truth found its voice and stayed loud, her name became a whisper, not because people forgave, but because they forgot, and forgetting was worse than cancellation. It was erasure, not of her doing but of her presence from the world she once shaped, and the only legacy that survived was the one built by those who refused to stay quiet, who fought every takedown, every blacklist, every lie until the mask cracked and the machine collapsed. And now when people ask who she was, they don't get an answer, they get a warning, a caution, a shadow of a story that never belonged to her, because the story became theirs, the one she underestimated, the ones she couldn't silence, the ones who turned her name into something she never imagined. A symbol, not of fame, but of what happens when truth outlives power, and now it's done. No comeback, no redemption, just the ending of a lie that lasted too long. After the cameras stopped, after the articles faded, after her name was no longer trending, the damage she caused didn't disappear, it spread, it seeped into the cracks of the industry she once controlled, because while her image was gone, the effects of her actions were still very real. Creators still rebuilding channels, reputations, mental health, entire careers that were once erased under her pressure, now slowly crawling back into visibility. And those same creators weren't chasing revenge, they were building something stronger, platforms of truth, of transparency, of real voices that couldn't be bought or buried anymore. And the industry knew it too, because what Blake did wasn't just a personal failure, it was a systemic exposure, and people in power started to panic, not because they cared about justice, but because they feared being next, because her fall set a precedent. And now executives, lawyers, brand reps, even agents began facing scrutiny, their emails being pulled, their strategies dissected, and all because one woman's lies cracked open an entire structure. And now the cleanup wasn't cosmetic, it was structural, and for the first time Hollywood wasn't asking how to protect an image, it was asking, how many more like her exist behind the curtain? And that question didn't fade, it only grew, and Blake couldn't answer it anymore, because the world no longer cared what she had to say. The spotlight had moved, and it wasn't coming back. The culture of silence that once held Hollywood together like invisible chains began to split, because Blake Lively's exposure wasn't just a fall, it was a mirror, and people started seeing their own reflections in her strategy, her manipulation, her machinery, and it terrified them, because the tools she used weren't unique, they were taught, copied, inherited from those before her. And now every publicist, every fixer, every executive who ever said, keep your mouth shut, just ride the wave, was scrambling, because creators weren't scared anymore. They had proof, they had support, they had each other. And the culture of silence that once rewarded compliance now punished it, because staying quiet meant being complicit, and the new audience wasn't buying that anymore. They wanted names, they wanted documents, they wanted the truth, even if it hurt. Even if it cracked the surface of the people they once loved. And those cracks became ruptures, interviews canceled, mid-shoot scripts rewritten, entire projects shelved, because someone somewhere finally asked who else used these tactics, and the answers were not pretty, they were powerful names. Beloved names, names that had gone untouched for decades, and the industry didn't just shift, it trembled, because for the first time silence didn't equal safety, it equaled suspicion. And the ones who had once weaponized silence now found themselves surrounded by noise, real noise, voices that wouldn't back down, wouldn't be bought, wouldn't be erased. And through it all, Blake remained absent, not because she wanted to be, but because there was no place left for her to stand, no camera left to save her, no stage left to lie on, because the culture she once thrived in had finally turned on her. And in doing so, it turned on itself. From the ashes of Blake Lively's collapse came something no one expected, not chaos, not another scandal, but a shift, a real one, the kind that doesn't come from headlines, but from hearts, from minds, from people who watched her fall and said never again. And this time, it wasn't about revenge, it was about reconstruction, because creators who had been silenced, erased, punished for speaking up were now leading movements, building platforms from scratch, hosting roundtables, creating networks where influence didn't mean perfection but honesty. And the new generation wasn't chasing viral fame, they were chasing truth, and the audience followed not because of algorithm tricks or perfectly lit reels, but because they saw themselves in the struggle. They saw what Blake tried to bury, and they brought it back to the surface, louder, clearer, unafraid. And studios saw it too. Because their numbers didn't lie, their engagement dropped when they stayed loyal to old systems and spiked when they partnered with those who told it like it was, and suddenly, the rules had changed. Red carpets meant less. Transparency meant more. Public apologies were expected, not crafted, and no one could rise to the top without being ready to be held accountable. And through all of this, Blake remained silent, not because she was choosing peace, but because she no longer had a voice. The machine was gone, the handlers were gone, the protection, the privilege, the control, it all vanished, and in its place stood a new era, not defined by her, but born from the destruction she left behind. And while her name faded from the headlines, her impact didn't, because every change, every shift, every step toward honesty carried the shadow of her lie, a lie so loud it made truth permanent. From the ashes of Blake Lively's collapse came something no one expected, not chaos, not another scandal, but a shift, a real one. The kind that doesn't come from headlines, but from hearts, from minds, from people who watched her fall and said never again. And this time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reconstruction, because creators who'd been silenced, erased, punished for speaking up were now leading movements, building platforms from scratch, hosting roundtables, creating networks where influence didn't mean perfection but honesty. And the new generation wasn't chasing viral fame, they were chasing truth, and the audience followed not because of algorithm tricks or perfectly lit reels, but because they saw themselves in the struggle. They saw what Blake tried to bury, and they brought it back to the surface, louder, clearer, unafraid, and studios saw it too. Because their numbers didn't lie, their engagement dropped when they stayed loyal to old systems and spiked when they partnered with those who told it like it was, and suddenly the rules had changed. Red carpets meant less. Transparency meant more. Public apologies were expected, not crafted, and no one could rise to the top without being ready to be held accountable. And through all of this, Blake remained silent, not because she was choosing peace, but because she no longer had a voice. The machine was gone, the handlers were gone, the protection, the privilege, the control, it all vanished. In its place stood a new era, not defined by her but born from the destruction she left behind. And while her name faded from the headlines, her impact didn't, because every change, every shift, every step toward honesty carried the shadow of her lie, a lie so loud it made truth permanent. The platforms that once protected her, that once obeyed quiet commands to shadow ban, erase, silence, now stood exposed. Their code was cracked, their secrets spilled, and the creators who once feared them now confronted them head on, not with anger but with evidence and power, because they had numbers, they had unity, and most importantly, they had the eyes of the world. And for the first time, the platforms couldn't hide behind policies, they couldn't call it a glitch or a misunderstanding, because the receipts were everywhere. Videos, takedowns, flagged accounts, unfairly suppressed emails, showing backdoor conversations with her team, it all surfaced, and the public demanded more than statements. They demanded change, and creators organized not in whispers, but in mass public digital walkouts, platform boycotts, massive data drops that forced CEOs into emergency meetings. And this time, the influencers weren't alone. They had lawyers, journalists, whistleblowers, all pointing at the same rot, the same hidden control Blake Lively once used to destroy competition, and now this same control was being dismantled piece by piece, code by code, rule by rule. New transparency laws were proposed, real audits and forced moderation exposed for its bias, and suddenly creators were being heard, truly heard for the first time, and the platforms had no choice but to comply, because their silence now meant complicity, and complicity meant collapse. And through it all, Blake was silent, still watching from the sidelines of a world she no longer controlled. And every new creator that rose, every voice that refused to be silenced, was a reminder that her legacy was not influence. It was correction, a lesson coded into the foundation of what could never be allowed again. Her name was no longer spoken in meetings, not out of respect, not out of fear, but because it became forbidden, a name that carried weight not of glory, but of shame, of risk, of irreversible fallout. And in boardrooms across Hollywood and in private group chats among executives and showrunners, there was only one unspoken rule: never do what she did, never let it happen again, because the cost wasn't just reputation, it was structure. Studios lost millions, platforms lost trust, brands lost entire audiences, because they backed someone who used power to erase truth. And now any sign of that behavior, any whisper of manipulation, any hint of silent control was enough to shut down deals overnight, and people